make sure I can see. The slides are different on my computer than here. This is me and my kiddo, Asher, and my husband, Ed Baxter, who sadly is no longer with us. But it was around this time where I was really struggling with raising this kid who did not fit into any of the boxes that I was trying to put him into. You know, I had a clear vision for what preschool was going to look like and what our life would look like and what sports Asher would participate in and, you know, what school we would go to. And time after time I was getting the message that Asher has his own agenda and it's very different from my agenda. And so I really had to work hard to come to a place of acceptance and just understanding that this is a unique individual that I'm parenting who has his own journey to go on. And that is what my journey has been over the past 10 plus years. And that's really why I wanted to create Tilt, was to support parents and maybe coming to that realization sooner than I did, because I will say that I fought it a long time. I really did try to mold my child into the kid I thought he should be. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And one of the things that I have learned in doing this work is that no matter who our kids are, so whether they're neurodivergent or not, our kids are not going to be the child we expected. In some way, they're going to show up with, again, their own agenda, their own personalities, their own way of being in the world. And so the problem for us is when we keep parenting the child that we wished we would have or that we thought we had. That's where the real problems come in. So here's what I know about our kids. I know that they are on their own journey, their hero's journey. I like to say that our kids are creative, resourceful, and cool, which isn't something I think when we're talking about kids, it's not necessarily the first way that we would categorize them, but I really think it's important to remember that they are individuals with their own lives to lead and their own story to tell. I also know that we can't make them be something that they're not. We can't make them care about something. I get asked all the time, how do I get my kid to do this? We can't make our kids do anything if they don't care about it. We can't motivate our kids. So they're really on their own timeline. We can't change their neurobiology. They are wired the way that they're wired. And we also can't change their personality, which, again, I have learned this lesson the hard way. I have a kid who is very kind of a glass half empty person. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that profile. I had someone on my podcast about kids who are persistent negative thinkers. And that has really hurt for me because that is not how I move through the world. And so that is something I've had to really work on, is understanding I can't change the fact that this is a kid who has a more negative mindset. That's kind of the default mode. So while we can't change these things, I want to be clear, we can influence. So we can't mold and shape, but we can influence through the way that we model things. But it's important to know that we can't control. And that's kind of the first piece to showing up for the child that we have. So I wanted to share this quote from Byron Katie. It's one of my favorite quotes. It is, when you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. And when I first read that, it was just kind of like, oh my gosh, that is so true. Because I had to recognize that what I am often doing, what many of us are often doing, is arguing with reality. And there's no way that we're going to win that. And so in the 7 years that I've been working with parents, what I have discovered is that the biggest pain points, again, it comes from that gap from what we expect, or what we think, and what is really going on with our kids. And, you know, my husband, Darren, I can still hear him saying, back when Asher was 8, 9, 10, and we were really in kind of I call it the dark ages, but it was pretty intense. We had a very intense, kind of explosive, strong-willed child. And, you know, Darren would say, he shouldn't get so angry, or, you know, he needs to handle frustration better, or if I tell him to do something, he should just do it. And I would just say, yes, and he's not. Like, yeah, he should, but he's not. Like, he should handle this better, but he isn't. And so I think that's just a little clue when we're using words like has to, or must, or needs to, or should. That is usually a sign that we're arguing with reality. But again, that's where we want to start to pay attention, because it's in that gap that the real pain and frustration and overwhelm and all of those things that we might be experiencing, that's where that lies. And so we have to really come to terms with the fact that the only thing we can control, really, in this equation is ourselves. And, until that's really what my focus is on. So if you visit Tilt Parenting, you're not going to find 10 strategies to get your kids off screens, but you will find strategies to help you navigate that dynamic and not flip your lid so you can emotionally regulate through it, because what we can control in this is our own experience. So the plan for tonight is I want to talk first about why it's so important that we show up for who our kids are, how it really supports our families, the family dynamic, and then I always like to share lots of strategies for how to do this. Not because I think you should do all the strategies, but hopefully one or two of the things will resonate and you can just start to explore it and play with it in your own family. So that is the plan. So let's talk about why we struggle with acceptance and showing up for who our kids are. I mean, first of all, I don't know about you, but it wasn't really modeled for me as a child. Like, my parents were not spending a lot of time thinking about how can I really show up for your experience. Like, I grew up in a very authoritarian household, and it was, my dad's way or no way. And so it can feel uncomfortable, actually, to start to lean into and show up and recognize the unique needs of our kids, because it probably wasn't modeled for a lot of us. It's also the kind of thing that we don't know it until we're in it, right? When you're pregnant, it's like, well, you don't know what it's going to feel like till you're pregnant, or there's just no way to gauge this. So until we're raising a child who we realize isn't meeting our expectations or is going on their own path and what that's going to feel like, we have no idea that it's an issue, right? We're just going to keep marching along. And for parents raising only neurotypical kids, that actually might work for a while. It might just be fine to my kid does what I want them to do and does the sports I want them to do. I think at some point the rubber meets the road when that child goes their own direction, and that can be really surprising. But for those of us who are raising differently wired kids, I kind of think of us as the wingsuit flyers of parenting. It's a little more of an extreme sport for us. So we're accustomed to that earlier on, but we don't know it until we're really in it. It's also hard to accept our kids because it can really trigger our own baggage, right? So whatever our kids are going through, it might really spark us in a way, and like dig into our self-identity, right? As a good parent, or I'm really competent at this. And so if we're diverging from the path, that could be really hard for us. And as part of that, we also might really worry what other people think of our parenting, right? So to accept the child we have might mean taking a completely different path. I was just talking before I started that, my child now is a senior in high school. And, everyone wants to know, where's Asher going to college? What's happening? And I'm like, no, we're doing it differently. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm approaching the future with openness and curiosity right now. But that can be hard because there is this expectation about the way that things should look. So that can make it hard for us to accept. Let me make sure that I'm on the right slide here. Sorry, I got a little lost here. Okay. So what I wanted to share is what happens when we do not show up for the child that we have. So first of all, we feel frustrated, right? That's when we're kind of stuck in that expectation gap. That sparks a lot of frustration for us. We can get into cycles of conflict with our kids, We can really hurt our relationship with our child, and I'm going to talk later on about creating deep connection and relationship with our kids. They can grow up feeling insecurely attached, which is kind of a big deal because secure attachment is one of the most important things that our kids can have as children so they can grow up to have healthy relationships. So if they don't feel seen and accepted for who they are, they may become insecurely attached. And then they might internalize this message that they're broken or that there's something wrong with them. You know, I wrote a book called Differently Wired, and one of the first stories I shared in there was how my son kept apologizing, for nothing. And finally I was like, why are you apologizing? You didn't do anything. And he said, well, I'm just used to it because I had to apologize all the time in school for anything related to my ADHD. If I blurted something out, if I, anything. And it just really broke my heart that this is a kid who internalized this idea that I'm a bad kid. He was kicked out of classes when he was younger because he'd get upset and dysregulated. And so a lot of our kids are already getting the message that there's something wrong with them. So us really showing up for who they are is really important. When we do show up for them, they can feel emotionally safe. They can feel that secure attachment. We can have a much deeper relationship with them. We can have that healthier family dynamic, which can be everything. Our kids can grow up knowing who they are, which is what I think we want our kids to do more than anything else, is understand their unique strengths, their relative challenges, how to advocate for themselves, how to ask for what they need, but they need to feel secure in order to do that. And when we show up for who they are, they feel safe to take healthy risks. And that is really important for them to grow confidence and feel good about who they are. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about what it means to show up for them and what acceptance actually means. And I always like to start by talking about what acceptance is not. Sorry. Too many devices here. Okay. I wanted to share this because I think a lot of us have this idea that acceptance is like a destination. I know that I thought that for many years, that it was like this, I was really struggling, this is so hard, but someday I'm gonna just reach full acceptance and I'm just gonna be cool. Like nothing's gonna faze me. I have since learned that happiness is not a destination, so it's an emotion, so just letting you know that. So acceptance isn't a destination. It is also not achieving a kind of Zen-like state, and I share that because I used to feel, I think when I was doing this work, I had watched Eat, Pray, Love. Has anyone seen that movie, Elizabeth Gilbert? And, I watched her journey, and I remember talking with the parenting coach and saying, I know all this stuff, I should be able to be all Zen, like I should be able to be above all of this and not get so triggered. And she's like, Debbie, Elizabeth Gilbert does not even have children. Like, why are you comparing yourself to her? But that was an idea I had in my mind, that I was just going to be totally cool, and nothing was ever going to frustrate me again. So that is not what acceptance is. That's the good news, because that is impossible to achieve. What acceptance is a conscious choice to focus on strengths. It's a conscious choice to take action every day to show up for who our kids are. It is an action. Acceptance is a choice. Just like if you're in a relationship with someone, you choose each other every day. You choose to show up for that relationship. That's what acceptance is. It's also just committing to doing our own work, which I do daily. I have a lot of opportunities. I'm sure we all do. Our kids give us a lot of opportunities to practice this stuff. But it is that commitment to saying, okay, I'm going to lean into this, and I'm going to do the work. It's also just kind of recognizing where we're in kind of a fix-it mindset. I think that's a phase a lot of us go through when we realize our kids are moving through the world in a different way, right? Where we find these things out, all right, I'm going to get all the right support, and I'm going to fix this, and we're going to address this so we can get back on the path that I wanted to be on. So need to recognize when we're in a fix-it mindset versus a support and understanding and accommodating mindset. And so part of that is also just embracing a growth mindset for ourselves. So here's what I have also learned along this journey, is that there is no one way that this parenting path has to look. Again, a lesson I continue to learn on a regular basis, but it's so true, and it's so hard to lean into this because we get reminders every day that the path we're on may look different, and that there is kind of a normal path or a typical path. So this can be tricky, but when we can embrace and accept and lean into this idea, like, wait a minute, this can look any way we want it to look. There is no one way. We can forge our own path. That can actually be really freeing. So what we want to do is to show up for the child that we have and to lean in. That really sets our kids up for the best possible outcomes. So I wanted to share 4 strategies for how we can do this. Again, I always like to share a lot of ideas within strategies. There are many strategies, so don't think you have to do all the things, but I just encourage you to just listen and see what resonates for you, and just get curious about how these ideas might support your relationship with your kids. So the first thing is that we want to do our own work. And again, this is a lot of what I talk about in Tilt Parenting, is the need to do our own deep inner work. And, I remember, Asher, probably like many of your kids, we've gone through a number of diagnostic processes, the early evaluation with the provisional diagnoses, and then a couple years later, another, it's a lot of letters and labels and things, identifications. But I remember the first time that the words ADHD, or that label, was given to Asher. I think Ash was 5, and I was not having it. I was like, my child does not have ADHD. I don't know why. I think I didn't even realize that I had an idea about what ADHD was that was negative. And so I really pushed back on that. I clearly didn't think it was a good thing. I have since learned that my child indeed has ADHD, very severe ADHD, and I really learned that when I homeschooled Asher and saw that, doing anything involved cartwheels over the back of the couch, and it was a very active environment when we were homeschooling. But I had to really come to terms with that. I had to confront my own ideas and internalized ableism, really, about ADHD and what did that mean. And that was really an important part of me kind of coming to terms with that. So this is a really important thing that we all have to do, is to just bring these things to light, because if we don't, they are going to influence our parenting and we're not going to know it. They are going to affect the way that we show up for our kids. So I talk about getting it all out on the table. So just being really honest with yourself. No judging, no shaming, but even writing down a list of things that you might believe, or ideas that you have about a label, or neurodivergence in general, or something that is associated with your child. It could be like a fear that you have about your child's potential or their future that is unexamined, but that just kind of is residing in there. So it is really important to just get those out on the table. If you're someone who has a child with a diagnosis, but you notice that you're not using the terminology because, and I hear this all the time, people are afraid to use the word autism, or they'll kind of use functioning labels or other things to kind of minimize what it means. So if you notice that you're not using the language with other people, it's just good to be aware of that, because there might be something there that you want to explore and think about what's going on here. Why am I not using this language? And what am I making it mean that this label is associated with my child? We also want to get real about aspects of our kids' wiring that we might find annoying, that might be confronting to us and that we really wish would change. We just want to know those things, so again, they don't influence the way that we show up. And for me, like, I had to really get honest about the negative stigma that I had somehow, it had become part of my view of what ADHD was. I had to really address that. So you want to confront those negative stigmas that you might be thinking about. So this is what I recommend people do, is to confront your hot button issues. See, I put a picture of a button there in case you wanted to make the association. But, just really make a list. I think, it's not there.
No, we're working on it.
Oh, there was a picture of buttons there to make the association. So I'll keep going and hopefully we'll get it back up. But make a list of those issues, like write it down. It's good to just get it out and see it. Again, no judgment. No one's judging you. You're just being honest with yourself and know these are issues for me. So that when they show up, you can be like, oh yeah, that's that thing again. And then we want to make a conscious choice to work on those, to pay attention and see if we can shift the way that we're thinking. And then we want to reframe. Life for us is going to be full of reframing because our minds tend to think about things in one way, and we always want to consider other ways to view them. And I'll give you an example of a reframe. Again, the ADHD thing. Asher used to blurt things out all the time or interrupting, right? And that can be frustrating if you're like talking and you're constantly being interrupted. Anybody have experience with this? Yeah. So the reframe, that could be something, fair enough. That's frustrating, right? But if we're thinking, oh my gosh, it drives me crazy when this kid interrupts me, we can reframe it and think, my child has so many ideas, it's so hard for him to keep it inside, right? It's the same situation. It doesn't mean that we're not going to work on things. Doesn't mean that we're not going to address that. I got really good at saying, instead of, stop interrupting me, I would say, can you hold that thought? I really want to hear what you have to say. I can tell you're super excited about it, but just hold that thought so I can finish my thought. Otherwise, I'll lose, track. So it's those little reframes. It doesn't mean we're not working on it, but it's just going to change. It's going to help our child feel supported and not like they're in trouble or they're doing something wrong. We can do this reframe with really all of the things that we identify as beliefs that we're struggling with. All right, I don't have a slideshow yet, but if I did, you would see a picture of a kid tying their shoes, and this is strategy number 2, and that is to make peace with our kids' timelines. So timelines are a big deal. This comes up all the time in my community, and I remember an educational advisor that I worked with had once told me, Debbie, Asher's on a very jagged timeline. Like, Asher's not going to be this like straight upward climb, and I was so disappointed to hear that wasn't the case. But she's like, no, these kids, it's very back and forth and zigzag. Again, not what I wanted to hear at the time, but that's true. It's actually true for all kids. With differently wired kids, it tends to be, thank you. It tends to be more extreme, right? The jagged nature of their timelines. So there's this thing called the compare and despair cycle. See if this is working. Okay. Ooh. I don't know what happened. Okay. Because it is in this tension surrounding our kids' timelines that a lot of frustration and overwhelm and stress comes into play, and it can be a significant barrier to our accepting who our kids are and showing up for who they are. And this can be surrounding their physical state, they could be late developers, it could be their cognitive, they could be late readers, they could be advanced readers, they could just be very uneven, it could be their social emotional development. So, we know a lot of neurodivergent kids, even if cognitively they're, working a couple grades ahead, socially they might be a couple grades behind. So there are all these ideas. There's the life skills piece, the independence. So we can get super stressed out about where our kids are, and more specifically, where our kids aren't when it comes to timelines. And again, this is something that comes up all the time in my community, often about tying shoes, which is why I had that picture there. There's a lot of stress about, my child does not know how to tie their shoes. And I'm like, I think that is okay. That is what Velcro and zippers are for. But we can feel really stressed about this stuff because, again, social media, we're just always reminded about where our kids should be, and when they aren't there, that can feel really uncomfortable. So what I recommend people do, if you're noticing you have a timeline situation, we all have them. I still have plenty of things that I have to grapple with, but these questions can be really helpful to think about, honestly answer. Why does my child need to know this now? Really answer that truthfully. Why is it so important that my child knows this now? What's the worst thing that could happen if my child learns this in their own time? And how might my child mastering this in their own time actually be totally fine? And I do want to just say, safety is a different thing. So if it's a safety issue, then fair enough, you want to work on those skills. But most of the time, when we address our concerns and we ask these questions, we're not going to come up with a really good reason why they have to learn it right now. And the reason I have the calligraphy there is because when I was homeschooling my kid, of course, I thought I had to this is when you do this, and this is when you do this, and this is when we learn cursive, right? So I bought the book, the Cursive Without Tears book, from the Handwriting Without Tears franchise, and there were tears within one day. It did not go well, and I very quickly realized, you know what? You do not need to learn cursive. I think Ash was in 3rd grade. I'm like, it's all good. I will be your typist. You dictate to me. We'll figure this out down the road. So I totally dropped it. And then years later, Asher is someone who dives deep into really random things, was researching Spencerian scripts or something. I don't know. And I was like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm just researching the history of different types of cursive, whatever. And that led to an interest in typeface design. I found him a mentor to work with him, and she was into calligraphy. They started doing calligraphy together. Now Asher knows how to do calligraphy. Asher loves to sign his name, and it has a very nice signature. I guarantee none of that would have happened if I had enforced my agenda and pushed that. So the timeline thing is really important, and it helps our kids build so much agency when we back off. And so when we accept our kids' unique timeline, they just have a lot more room to grow on their own terms. And when they can learn it in a way that feels good to them, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I'm super behind, that just changes the whole experience for them. And again, we want them to know themselves well. So that personal knowledge is really a key thing. All right, I'm moving on to number 3. Am I on the right slide? Sorry. Okay. So we want to show up for our kids with presence and prioritize deep connection for them. And this is just part of how we want to move through the world for our kids. And I want to share a quote from this wonderful book, The Power of Showing Up. It's written by Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson. They wrote the book, The Whole Brain Child, which many of you may have read or be familiar with. But I really love that book, and I love this quote. The ultimate aim is to simply be present to your children, to create space and time to get to know them better and to understand them at a deeper level so you can help them grow into the fullness of who they are. So this is so important that our kids are deeply connected, and here is why. Because when our kids are not known, again, they already get a lot of negative messages, a lot of our kids. So they may go through life feeling misunderstood if we're not showing up for who they are and they don't really feel that sense of being seen. They might develop as a result of that low self-worth and grow up with this internalized shame, and that's really going to play out in their relationships, their future, and their potential. But when we show up for who our kids are and they have this deep sense of being known, they also feel good about taking those healthy risks. They know themselves better, and they can grow up knowing I'm not too much. You know, they're going to feel so much more secure, and that foundation is really what we want for our kids to create the lives that they want. So being present and in deep connection with our kids is really at the heart of having a deep and supportive relationship with our children. So this is something, and I have some ideas for how to do this. And I will say, I think it can be challenging if you're in a cycle of conflict with your child. It's not always going to be the first thing to be like, oh, well, let me spend more time with my child. Let me lean more fully in. Because it can be really hard, especially if we're struggling over things like screen time and homework and all of the things. So just a couple of ideas for how we can start to incorporate this. Sorry, my clicker's not working. Okay. These are very simple things you can do. I love this idea of having a light up moment with our kids. I define that as just like once a day when you see your child maybe at school pickup or after soccer practice or something, like let them just see that you're really excited to see them, like genuinely, you know? It just makes all the difference in the world for your kid to see like true joy on your face when you see them. Listen deeply and openly, even about Spencerian scripts or whatever random deep areas of interest our kids are into, and ask them questions about that stuff. If we make mistakes with them, repairing is really an important way to foster connection. Just like, hey, I didn't handle that right and I'm really sorry. I'm working on it. I wish I had taken a breath before I responded to you. Carving out one-on-one time, just making sure you have dedicated time, even a few minutes here and there, but things that are just for you guys. And then validating their feelings. So, a couple ways to foster deep connection with them. Okay, number 4, and the last strategy, and then I will take some questions. This is really what it's all about, is to lean all the way in. And I think this, sorry, I'm looking at an older, lean all the way in. I'm looking at an older slide on my computer here. So this is really what it's about. Raising differently wired kids is, I just want to say, it's uncomfortable. I mentioned before the wingsuit flyer pairings that many of us are, that it can be this extreme sport. And I like this quote by Neil Donald Walsh, that life begins at the end of your comfort zone. I actually have this like all over my house because it's a reminder that this isn't a comfortable journey for a lot of us. But again, we don't want to fight the discomfort, we want to lean into it, because that's when we can really start to change our relationship. I think that's where all the good stuff is, honestly, at the other side of that. And a big part of showing up for these kids is staying open. It's being curious, and it is leaning into the discomfort. So I have a couple ways that we can do this. One is to embrace the opportunities for personal growth. Part of leaning all the way in means being open to our own journey and to our own learning. And I'm just going to share a quick story of when I learned a big lesson from my kid. We had moved abroad. We lived in Amsterdam for a number of years. And that's when I started homeschooling, so we changed everything at once. And everyone was dysregulated in my house, and I was trying to control homeschool and my kid and screen time, and there was a lot of iPadding and Minecraft at the time. This was in 2013. And Asher was super dysregulated, and I remember like standing outside his bedroom door and demanding that he do his coping routine. Like I yelled, like, you need to do your coping routine. And then I left, I marched away, and I was like, oh my God. Okay, so I calmed down, I went back in, and Asher had already like forgotten it, was just happily like hanging out in the room, and so I apologized, and I said, I think I'm the one who needs the coping routine here. And Ash said, yeah, well, I got this CD from the OT before we left, Chris Johnson. Do you want to do it together? It's like a relaxation CD. I was like, okay. So he like laid out a mat on the floor, and we laid down, and we did this CD together, quietly like meditated, and then it was over. I'm like, wow, I feel so much better. And Ash was like, yeah, no, I think you need a Diet Coke. And I was like, you really do know me, but I have since quit Diet Coke, I just want to put it out there. But that was such a pivotal moment for me when I realized how much I can learn from this human if I'm open to it. And that learning continues today, all these years later. So again, oh, that's the picture. That's where it all happened, folks, right there. So yeah, I mean, these are just some of the lessons I continue to learn. I don't have to have all the answers. I actually can't control anything, even though I still try. And that even when things are really hard, there's always growth. There's always something there for me. Okay, let me move on. I'm keeping track of the time, and I know I'm running a little long here. Okay, the next strategy is to not resist. And you know, this is about that aphorism that what we resist persists. And so instead of resisting, we really want to create an acceptance practice. And acceptance is really about meeting life where it's at in the moment. It doesn't mean, again, we're not fixing things forever. We're not saying this is fine for the rest of my life. It's really like in the moment right now, how can I find peace in what's hard right now? So we don't want to resist that. So to have our own acceptance practice, we want to pay attention to when we are trying to control the outcome. And just remember that we're here to guide and support and love our kids. We're not here to control them. If we're triggered like I was in that situation with the iPad and the Minecraft, step away. Just commit to working on that. It's not easy to do in the moment to step away. I fully acknowledge that. If our kids are really confronting us, it takes practice, but it is a muscle that we can build. When we don't do it right, we can make repairs and apologize. And then just be gentle on ourselves, because this is a very human experience raising these kids, so I'm a big fan of practicing self-compassion. Going back to what we talked about before with deep connection, we want to create rituals that foster that connection. Rituals are so important because they help our kids feel that sense of safety and security. They're predictable, they're known, and they're really important to help them feel that sense of belonging. And so I'm sure you already have many rituals with our kids. We used to go on really long walks and talks. Now that I have an 18-year-old, they're not happening as much. But we'll still go do we worked at a coffee shop this morning before school. And that's like a little routine that we have. And that builds connection, because it's just something that we do. We want to be curious and dive into their worlds. That is an image from a text adventure game called Anchorhead, which I have played with my child. I am not a gamer, but I have realized that gaming is an access point to Asher's world. And so I'll ask Asher to explain, actually, can you run through Half-Life with me? I'll watch you. You know, that is like super exciting for Asher to get to show me how to do that. Or Asher's learning bass. Like, will you show me how you did that really cool thing? I don't know how to play the bass. So find opportunities to lean into their worlds, even if it's not the most, even if you're not into gaming. again, I'm not into gaming. Asher went through a phase where he was really into flags, heraldry. Anybody into heraldry here? We spent hours looking at flag designs from every country and every state and how they were, the color schemes and anyway, that was meaningful to Asher, and it helped me get to know Asher better. So that's something that we want to do. And then we want to redefine our role. I mentioned earlier that we can't control our kids. But I like this idea of thinking of ourselves as our kids' mentors, as their coaches, as their consultants, even, especially when we're supporting them with homework as they get older. I like to think of myself as a consultant. I've got office hours, and you're welcome to work in here with me. But it helps us remember that our primary job is to support them, not to control who they are. And I wanted to share this quote from Chris Baum. He wrote a great book called Finding the Magic in Middle School. It's a pretty new book. I had him on the podcast. But he talked about this idea of companioning. So if you think of our kids as being on an adventure, and an adventure guide is someone who makes sure that they don't fall off the cliff, right? But they're there to support them and encourage them to grow through that journey. And so this idea of companioning is something that he encourages us as parents to embrace as well. So I love that concept. And the last one I wanted to share, and then I'm going to go on to questions, is to use words of appreciation, find meaningful ways to let our kids know that we see them and that we love them. I talked about having the light up moments, but we really want to find ways to authentically share that we get them, that we have their back, that we appreciate them, that we notice things that they do. That is going to help our kids, again, feel so seen and secure, and that is really at the heart of ensuring the best possible outcomes for them. So if you want to connect, this is where you can find Tilt Parenting. I'm happy to take questions. You guys have been a great audience, and I just want to thank you for having me here to have this conversation. I am so excited to get to talk about this stuff, because I think we spend a lot of time talking about our kids and not enough time tending to ourselves and our unique experience raising these kids. So thank you, and if there are any questions, then I'm happy to take about really anything.
It's working. Okay. Test.
So, one place I struggle with drawing the line is like manners or being polite. And I know you can't change your children, but how can you set up things like those expectations in a way that's not not doing any of the things we're talking about not doing?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because a child who isn't courteous or who's displaying bad manners can really be triggering for us, because we can feel judged and like everyone's looking at me or everyone thinks my child is rude. I think it's twofold. Part of it is doing your own work, like what am I making it mean? Am I caring too much about what other people think in this moment? And I mean, I will say I used to, literally, like, not literally, metaphorically, throw my child under the bus in a public situation. If he did something that I knew all eyes were on me, I was trying to save face for myself. I say that not with any pride, like I really hate that I did that, but I did because I really was aware of how other people were perceiving our kids. So I think it's important to do our own work there to see what's really there, and know that if our child is displaying, isn't recognizing those social cues or isn't being courteous in certain situations, most of the time it's not a willful choice. It's because there's a lagging skill there. There's something that they're not, reading the cues, they're not reading the room, they're not understanding the expectations, they don't have the emotional regulation, whatever it is. So I think with everything with our kids, our job is to always kind of get curious about what's real, what is the lagging skill here, and how can we start to build that muscle, and knowing too that it takes a long time, I'm just going to mention, in case you guys aren't familiar with Dr. Ross Greene, he wrote this amazing book. It was like my Bible for years, called The Explosive Child. And he has something called collaborative and proactive solutions. It's kind of a mouthful. If you have the Cliff's Notes, I had him on the podcast years ago, but that's really what he talks about, is lagging skills and unsolved problems. So anytime there's something going on with their kids, that's what we want to address so that they can actually learn the skills. We might be able to get our kids to be polite or say the right thing in a situation, but if they don't understand why, or they don't develop the skill building, it's not going to be meaningful for them. You're welcome. This room's really big now, isn't it?
That's why I gave it to Kara. She's younger than I am.
Getting my steps in.
Figure.
Of course, our child is very strong-willed, and she's having a tough time with math specifically. Reading seems to be in line, what we're doing is working. In math, it still seems to be lagging. She is getting services through school, and we've recently stepped back into kind of allowing the school to handle it and let it become much more peaceful. But my wife and I had the fear they were allowing her to slide back to a difficult level, whereas causing her unnecessary difficulty in school learning new concepts because she doesn't understand the basic stuff in her own education tables. I'm having a hard time not practicing them with her. So I guess we're having a hard time trusting that what the school is doing is enough, and that believing it's okay for us to just let go of it and preserve a relationship, which is, always can be improved, but just thinking that we're, this other thing is thinking we're not being good parents by not practicing with her.
Yeah.
So it's a tough one to feel.
Yeah, that is tough. Sorry, do you have I'm happy to share.
Yeah, so my question is, I guess I'm looking for some validation, some assistance on whether it's okay just to let the school handle it, or if we should be involved in some way.
Yeah, how old is your child again?
She's 10.
Okay. I just want to say that your instinct to preserve your relationship is a really good one. I think that's something I had to also learn. I've learned a lot of things the hard way, but that's something that I've learned, and everyone that I've talked with, Dr. John Duffy, Ned Johnson and Bill Stixrud wrote an amazing book. Sorry, I'm telling you too many books to read, but it's called The Self-Driven Child. One of the things that they talk a lot about homework and that support, and they actually use that consultant language, but they have this language of, I love you too much, and I care about our relationship too much to hurt it over conflict on homework. And that, when I read that, it really changed things for me. So I think it's challenging. I think with kids too, we often, I imagine your child has strengths in other areas. If math isn't like the strength, there's probably other things that, are more in a zone of strength. And I think it can be tricky because we often will spend all our time focusing on the areas of lagging skills or the deficits or the weaknesses. So first I would just say also making sure that you're really building up areas where she is strong so she can feel really confident about those. And in terms of, just be aware of that tension. Like if you notice that when, you can offer support, like find fun ways maybe to practice some math stuff at home, but if you're noticing that it's hurting your relationship, talking with the school and saying, how can we work together to support this child in learning these things? And just also knowing it might be a different timeline. That is the tricky thing, right? It's like, by this age, you have to know this. And Asher is studying for AP. They just took like a calculus 2 at a community college this year. Asher does not know his times tables. Like, doesn't know, like, there's like a block there around that. So I think it's also important to think about, that it doesn't always look the same way, and maybe there are other ways to move through that might accommodate for some areas. you know, I would let Asher have a multiplication table around when we were doing math stuff because that didn't matter. Understand how to do the math mattered. Oh, I just lost this. Can you hear me?
Try it one, do the other way. There it goes.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. So I don't know if that's helpful. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. I would, you know, I would pay attention to if you're noticing tension in your relationship, and really continue to work with the school. Like I think it's all about forging an alliance. Everybody wants the best possible outcome for our kids. So how can you guys work together to support her?
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. For my child, he's an 11-year-old, and I feel like I'm constantly at war with him, and it is like a constant struggle. We have mutual interests, and when we see those mutual interests, we're fine. We go, but then he'll, like you said, he'll go zigzag, and I find that it's like moving a river, and I'm just trying to move it, and what I find is that I get upset with him, and then I get resentful, and it's because, you know, when I was young, my father wanted me to do something. He had 2 ways to do it. He was going to get his way. But in my case, I'm avoiding that. I'm trying to be patient with him. And is there some way I can look at this and say it doesn't have to be a win or lose scenario? I can, if he's not doing it, is there some way I can avoid trying to force him? And if he doesn't, get frustrated and being like, well, I'm a bad father, and I failed my child. So, is there some way to say it for me to go like, okay, take a moment, do something, or just look at it a different way? Because, everything I know from parenting comes from my parents, and it was a different time. So,
Yes, indeed. And I want to just acknowledge the fact that you're bringing this up means that you notice this, like you are aware of that, and that's wonderful. I mean, these kids, all kids, but these kids demand so much from us. Like, we cannot get away with just like phoning it in, parenting these kids. They're going to always be confronting us, and that is what I think is one of the best gifts, because they can encourage us to do our own work. So my hunch is that there is, healing work maybe for you that could happen. Like, what I would encourage you to do is this question, what am I making this mean? Like, ask that question of the situation. What am I making it mean when my child goes in this other direction and I'm not able to go with the flow? What am I making it mean about myself as a dad? What am I, just get curious about that. Because again, often there's all kinds of stuff going on beneath the surface, and then we can be judging ourselves and shaming ourselves and just kind of go down this spiral. So I would get curious about that. And there might be an opportunity to kind of dispute untrue thinking, right? Or harmful or painful thoughts that you have about the way you should be as a dad or the way that you were parented. And you might be able to do some repair. And the first piece of that is to notice what you're already doing. So I would just get really curious, like what is the underlying thing that is making me so upset right now? And how can I be more compassionate with myself? How can I explore different ways of responding? You could try being really silly, or you could just lean all the way, just get kind of playful with it, and try different things. But again, the fact that you're here and that you are noticing this is something that's coming up for me is so important. A lot of parents don't get that far.
My wife and I have 2 daughters, a 15, almost 16-year-old, and a 13-year-old. And the good news is my wife Elizabeth and I are pretty far along in the process with our youngest. Through lots of conversations and external support, that you could do a whole topic about the marital dynamic that goes around here, but we've got a lot of that covered. What concerns me is the impact on the neurotypical child, right? Because the neurodiverse child gets a lot of attention, and it manifests itself often in our family as sometimes different standards for different kids, or there 9-month daughter was upset with my youngest for no real reason. I asked her what's going on. And finally said to her, I said, you know, sweetheart, it feels to me like you are being extra specially good because you know you have a hard child. And I want you to know you don't have to do that. And tears came out. So I touched on that. So that sibling dynamic is probably what we're struggling with more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's not unusual. I hear that from a lot of parents, whether it's a neurotypical and neurodivergent, or just two neurodivergent kids who have very different needs. You know, and I will just say I have one child, so I don't have personal experience with this, but I talk to a lot of experts about it. And what everyone says, I mean, these are kind of the tips and strategies that I've learned is, first of all, having kind of an open culture of individuality in your home, like we're all working on things, and just like a culture of openness where we talk about what's hard and what everybody's working on. And I'm sure that your child who has more needs is getting different attention, and that's appropriate, right? Like your other child doesn't need that same amount of support. I think having, you know, making sure that you have things that are just for you and your daughter who's neurotypical, making sure that you carve out that time is what I've heard is the most important thing. And I love that you had that conversation with her and that really resonated for her. I don't think there's any easy answers. I think it's making sure that as a family, you're always kind of talking openly about it. You're recognizing what's hard. You're recognizing that we're all working on things, and making sure that you do carve out unique time for your neurotypical child. But it's a lot. I have a friend who has 2 kids, and her older one is about to graduate high school, and she's the neurotypical, high-performing, you know, ultimate player, you know, star athlete, straight A student, all this, and her younger sibling is neurodivergent, and it has been a real struggle for that family. And their older daughter is like, can't wait to like go across the country to college, which I totally get. It can be really challenging on the other sibling, and I think just being honest about it and talking about it and doing what you can to keep that connection with her is the best that you can do.
One of the things I did this week was actually share. My youngest daughter has a nonverbal learning disorder, which means she misses a lot of the nonverbal cues, and it has interesting manifestations. And I sent my older daughter some literature. I'm like, this might be helpful for you to understand, because this is how your sister experiences the world. And so that, be open about it kind of rings true to me.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
But there's age appropriateness to all of that, right? And there's informational levels. Like 5 years ago, I don't think I would have had that conversation because it wasn't mature enough. I don't think I would give her the full educational report like this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a dance, always, with our kids. It's a dance in the way we scaffold for them. It's a dance in the way we support them and how we talk about their, you know, challenges. Like, I think that's one of the things is we think we've figured something out and we've gotten this, all right, we're sorted now. But then our kids change and they grow. And so we have to be really nimble and keep leveling up and changing and growing with them. So that's part of the fun, right?
Hi, thank you. I have a question about, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I can't quite tell if she's in denial about where things are for her or blissfully unaware. So I don't want to force or push her, you know, I want her to have her own timeline of when she understands things, but I don't know that where she is particularly helpful for her, so I don't know if you can speak to that.
Does she have some kind of formal identification?
She does, and she takes medication, she understands
She knows it.
that
Okay.
she has something, but she never wants to talk about it, she doesn't have any curiosity about it, and I think she wants to be, you know, normal.
Yeah.
You know, she's
Fair.
her brother,
Mhm.
so I think she's trying to walk one path that in the long run isn't gonna work for her, so
Yeah.
it's
a
tough
dance.
age,
Yeah.
You know, it's an age where I'm thinking she's probably gonna become aware if she's not, or,
Yeah.
so I just don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I run a parent community, and we just had this conversation yesterday. And it is tricky because you probably have concerns that may or may not materialize, right? So you're looking down the road, and this might happen, and I want to prepare her, and we can kind of see how things are going to play out, how we think they're going to play out, but they might not. So I think, again, part of it's twofold. Part of it is you kind of thinking about, okay, what's my own anxiety here? What am I trying to proactively prevent, knowing that we can't control anything, though we might try mightily. So coming to peace with that, what's my stuff here? And again, I talked about that open culture communication. Your daughter knows that she's neurodivergent, she's taking meds. Just that deep connection that I talked about is so important, especially at this age as they start to pull away, which they're supposed to do, but we want them to feel connected enough to us that they'll come to us. So, and that you feel like you're fluent in her, right? You're fluent in her language. So if you notice things are coming up, I would look at those as little opportunities to check in, hey, I noticed this happened. If you ever want to talk about this, I have some ideas that might be helpful. I try to leave it be on their terms, because we know, again, we can't motivate our kids, and our kids need to have buy-in in order for any of this to be meaningful for them. So I think, especially with teenagers, at some point, they're going to be invested enough because it's going to matter to them. And that's when you're like, okay, I got you. I have some ideas for you. So that's how I just kind of pay attention and look for, and I also think this isn't one big conversation. It's those little moments where you just say something and then you dip out again, look for little windows of openness for that.
So our daughter has ADHD, and I guess my biggest difficulty is that the quality of what she does is so poor. She just does things to do them. I mean, unless she's hyper-focused on something, like writing a story, she loves to write.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, it's okay, we can't use the iPad until this is done.
Mm-hmm.
And she'll just do it, So I'm not really sure, is that one of the things that we just wait until she's ready? I don't know. I'm an occupational therapist, and I have tried to make everything into a game, using physical activity, and I don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yes. So I'm going to just give one resource, Seth Perler. He's an executive function coach. He is brilliant, and he has a ton of free resources. Just throwing him out there, because I think you'll find some strategies. But Seth is a friend of mine. We've done a lot of events together, and one of the things I love about his philosophy is he always reminds me of the importance of zooming out and looking at the big picture. What are the skills that this child is going to ultimately need to be able to live a self-actualized life where they can do what they want to do and be happy, whatever that is, successful in whatever that looks like for them. And so I think when it comes to stuff like this, especially with homework, or it could be sloppy homework or just not to their potential, because clearly your child has other things on her mind, right? She doesn't care about this, so she's gonna, and procrastination shows up for a lot of our kids too, because it's just, they don't care about it. Again, we can't make them care about it. We can't make them have buy-in. I think we can look for opportunities to, and I would say the buy-in, if you can find buy-in that is related to something they care about, that isn't necessarily disconnected, I think the screen time thing, a lot of us use that as leverage, because it is leverage, right? But if there are ways to get them bought in that's more kind of connected to what they're doing, it can be more meaningful for them. But I would, in those situations, kind of look at break it down as small as possible and look for the littlest wins, I think we can think about all the things, because we see all the things that aren't happening, or the sloppy homework, or the, they'll do it and they won't turn it in, or whatever that looks like. So breaking it down into the tiniest of goals and working on one little thing. And when you get frustrated that it's not happening fast enough, just zoom out and be like, you know what, this is a long runway. I'm taking the big picture here. I'm going to focus on the bigger goal, which is that my child knows how to do this stuff, as opposed to this assignment for this class, for this grade right now. And that's hard. It's hard to do because there are grades and there are consequences for this stuff. So, but it's that scaffolding piece that we want to just try to slowly build. But I would check out Seth's. He has a YouTube channel. He's got videos for both kids and for adults, and he talks a lot about this specific challenge. But I will just say, it's great that she loves to write. Like that is wonderful. And if there are opportunities to lean more, even more into and invest more into that area of strength, there might be ways to learn some of those other skills through writing. You know what I mean? And then maybe they'll translate into other things over time.
Thank you very much for being here tonight, and I guess I'd also want to say, thank you all for being here tonight. This is a good community, and I've talked with some of you in the hall and here before the presentation, so give yourself credit for being here.
Yeah, I love that.
What do you do when you're exhausted? Maybe you started this journey at 2 years old with your child, and maybe your child was nonverbal, maybe you learned that they're ADHD, and you put in a lot of time, especially early on, and you feel like you're getting them to a pretty good point. The school has jumped in, they're getting support, and you're tired, right? And you want to find those special moments where you're open and connected. And maybe it's the end of the day, they don't want to go to sleep, it's 10 o'clock, they won't wake up the next morning. How do you maintain, that energy level? I admire you for being here and your enthusiasm, but I confess, I'm getting old.
Yeah.
And I can tell you where every gray hair came from. So, if you have any good advice, I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a great question, and it is a conversation I have with my therapist on a regular basis. Like, how much longer? And she's like, 25, 27. I'm like, oh, I do not want to hear that. I give a whole talk on managing our own emotional resources and conscious maintenance, because most of us are burned out. I mean, most parents are burned out post-COVID anyway, and then, you have the added complications of raising a differently wired child. I am a big advocate of conscious maintenance, which is my way of saying self-care, which I don't like that term because it just seems like it has a lot of negative stigma associated with it. But it is really important that we find ways to fill our own reserve bank, because there is no way we can show up for our kids if we're tapped out. Like, it's just not going to happen. So that's, for me personally, that has been the only thing that has kept me going. My husband is supportive of me sometimes saying, like, I need to just go for a walk right now, and I'll put on a podcast and I will just walk. And in New York, you walk really fast, and I will just burn it off. But I take time for myself every day, and I think we have to. It's not an optional kind of thing. We have to, even if it's 5 minutes listening to a song. I went through a phase where I created a proactive conscious maintenance plan. So I wrote down 10 things that I know make me happy. One of which I did on the drive here, listening to a song from Rent. That's on my list. So think about the things that can shift your mood: taking a shower, listening to a song, listening to a podcast, whatever it is. Using the toilet uninterrupted, I don't know. But make a list of those things, and I'm happy to actually shared this, that I have like a little tracker, a PDF tracker, but I used to have this on my desk, and I would check in every day, and if I noticed I hadn't checked out any for that day, I'd be like, okay, I have to listen to a song now. So I just had to get really intentional about making something happen for me, so I felt like I mattered, you know, because I think we're just always like giving out for our families and our kids, and we just can't show up if we're empty, if we're running on empty. Yeah, it's hard. And I appreciate that you thanked everyone for being here. Like, I think it's wonderful. Like, I remember I did a book event when Differently Wired came out, and it was actually in Pennsylvania, near Allentown. I don't remember the bookstore. But this group of moms, like 6 women, came up to me afterwards, and they're like, we all know each other from like soccer and this and that, but we had no idea that everyone else was raising a differently wired kid until they saw each other at the event. And so they're like, we're going to start a club now. And, you know, they talked about like creating T-shirts that say like, my child has an IEP, that so we could like find each other. So anyway, I just appreciate you all being here. This kind of community is so important.
I'll try to keep this real quick, but our daughter still appreciates and likes to have either Joel or I put her to sleep every night. She's 10 and we love her. We're so glad we can still do that at 10 years old. But some nights, as you said, you're just falling, you're done. I mean, I usually wake up at 3:45 in the morning to do crazy things in the morning, and I'm just like, you know, bedtime, I'm just done. Well, something works, and the rest of us, we take turns. Every other night, go back and forth, and I'm off tonight. Well, it's off night, so I'm really looking forward to getting that nice feeling tonight. I love it, so I'm getting ready for tomorrow night. But that's been very helpful for us. Hopefully that can work for you somewhere.
Anyone else have a question? Are we all good?
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you again. I'm happy to hear from you. If you want, go to tiltparenting.com and you can get in touch with me, and if you have any questions. But there are tons of resources on there. I will tell you, I'm doing a virtual book club for my book, Differently Wired. It's free. It starts on Monday. It runs for 4 consecutive weeks. So if you haven't read the book and you want to go through it with me and other parents, you can find out about that on the website too.
Thank you so much for coming out here this evening. And one of the things that I did promise, we do have this on video right now. It will be on the website, and we'll make sure on the website, Karen and I will figure out a way to put all of your information in there, some of the podcast, everything. So that'll be another really quick stop that you can get on there. And if for some reason you can't find it on the website, you can always call our office. It's Karen Miller, Jenny Lesage, and we're the Office of Student Services. But I have to tell you, if you're here tonight, you're making a difference. You really should be patting yourself on the back, and we appreciate Karen and I, everything you're doing for your children, because without you doing what you're doing for your children, we wouldn't be able to do anything for them. So thank you very much, and we want to continue our relationship with you. And since you're here, I just want to put one little plug out there. If you ever see something out there that you'd like to see here, know about something that you'd like to know more about, or anybody in this community, please reach out to us and let us know. The counselor, as I said before, Nicole Octaviano, is the one who located Debbie Reber for me, and we're always looking to bring people in for our parents. So again, Debbie, this was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank everyone here for